Welcome to Culture is an Inside Job, the podcast on building an authentic, engaging, and inspiring culture. Hi, I'm Wendy Roop, and along with my friends and co-hosts Karen Preston and Scott McGowan, we believe that building a healthy work culture starts with leaders like you. If you're ready to get real and dig deep into your own self-awareness, determine how you want to show up in the world, and then take aligned action to transform your leadership and those around you, then this podcast is for you. Now, let's go inside. Welcome back, everyone, to Culture is an Inside Job. Hey, Scott. Hey, Karen.
Hey.
Great to be back.
Taylor, always have to say thank you for all you do. Just got to do it. Today, we are going to jump into continuing our conversation around these levels of energy from that body of work energy leadership we've been talking to you about. So if you need more information, please check out our previous episodes. But I thought we could just start by recapping. We talked about level 3 last time and stepped into level 4. And so maybe we'll recap a little bit on 3 and then spend some time in level 4. How does that sound, Karen and Scott?
Perfect.
Okay. Karen, you want to recap us a little bit reminder about what is level 3 all about, and then move forward from there?
Sure thing. So to refresh us on catabolic and anabolic, catabolic being the lower mindset of more damaging and destructive energy, anabolic being more constructive and creative. Level 1, I lose. Level 2, you lose. Level 3, I win. So this is now us moving into a little bit more of the anabolic energy of getting our win. Level 4, you win. And this is that space of service and compassion to someone, something, or back to ourselves. And the subtle nuance of me getting my win in level 4 and not giving a rat's butt about anyone else. Level 3,
Yeah.
3, I win, getting my win. And level 4, showing myself the compassion, very different. Wendy, speak to that. What is different about that?
Well, when we're moving into that level 4, we're really coming from that place of, and again, not that this can't go either way, just because there are challenges in this level too, but we can be focused on making sure that we are taking care of ourselves, because we realize that in order to take care of ourselves, we can better take care of everybody else, right? But it is very, again, going back to that compassion for ourselves and for other people, and very service oriented. And we always like to talk about the challenge of it. The challenge can be that we're so focused on other people, and sometimes it's because we want to be liked, right? Perhaps we tend to be a pleaser, and so we want to make sure that, oh gosh, I got to make sure I'm taking care of everybody else, because if not, they won't like me. Or we can get caught up in the drama of somebody else, because when we're helping them, perhaps they're not making the shifts that we think they should. And I think, Karen, you and I, we learned this when we went through, IPEC, and we learned more about these levels. But it can also be when we're in this level, it's because there is still, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's still a level of judgment here, right? Because we think sometimes when we're in this level, we can think there's something to be fixed in somebody else.
Yeah,
right?
Still some judgment here for sure. Judgment of what needs to have compassion. We're making some decisions about who needs the most service and why, and judgment that we're not, we're still go back to the I'm not good enough, so I need to be able to, to give myself or this space or whatever. Like I sometimes use the circumstance one instead of it being a certain person or yourself. It's your situation. It could be your office, right? You could have papers everywhere, and it just needs a little bit of level 4 love. The more you're willing to give that space some compassion and love that it needs, that's where you'll start to get to those higher levels of the win-win, right? So anything, it's just give it the attention that it needs. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. And Scott, I want to pull you in here because, again, we can all go a mile a minute. And so I think it's important in each one of these episodes when we're sharing with our audience to make sure we keep coming back to the core of what this podcast is all about, really, which is culture. And this level 4, this is when we're truly stepping into that anabolic energy. And it really is all about, service. And so, Scott, as you think about that from a culture perspective, and, I got the opportunity to work for you for 7 years and work with you for 7 years. And so I saw how you do this and you still do this so beautifully. But talk about the importance of this, right? And coming from this level of energy in general, but especially just today with, everything that's going on in the world and so forth.
Well, I think for me, like when I first started looking at these different levels, and it's like, hey, like, do I even have time to even understand this? Right? There's just like, it's too much. I'm good. But here's what I think the listeners maybe might lean into to try to want to understand this. Because I do a lot of work in recovery. And so I do a lot of work with folks that are addicts, whether it be, alcohol or drugs or whatever. And I think the mindset that helps me understand the power of this is, whenever someone started using, they stopped growing up. So if I was 16 and I started drinking alcohol, then I stopped. My brain's 16 years old. Now, even if I'm not an addict, when we started getting our way with our own behavior, we stopped growing up. So in other words, if I'm commanding, if I'm but by the way, level 3, right? And at inches of 4 are what I refer to as destructive heroes, high-powered, high-paid individual contributors that
Mm,
destroy organizations. And owners are way too drunk on their revenue or their relationships to fire them. You zip up body bags of people that are always around them, right? You celebrate them, you applaud for them, which is really telling the workforce, guess what gets rewarded around here? Arrogant, self-centeredness, manipulative behavior. That's what gets rewarded around here. And people that are purpose-driven and have a deep purpose for compassion, like they will leave. And so in other words, and the reason for I'm bringing this up is, you, if you don't understand this, then you don't have the tools, because you don't want to live in the bottom, like, but you can't walk around life with a hammer in your hand all the time. And we talked about that before. I need a torque wrench. I don't even know what a torque wrench does. Wire cutters. like you need different
Yeah.
tools for that to move. And when you find them and you have access to them, you can reach behind you and grab that tool. They are beautiful,
mhm,
beautiful. And I know I'm talking too much, but when you
mm.
use them for yourself, beautiful things can happen. I'll tell you a story that happened yesterday. I went to, and I told Taylor this, but I was going to a meeting, and I opened my car door, and where I parked, the wind was really strong. Well, it took my door and threw it into a brand new BMW, and at first I didn't really look at it because I thought, well, that might have put a scratch in it. Fair, like, might be a scratch, but I was in a hurry. So I ran upstairs, and I only had to meet with a guy for like 15 minutes. So as I'm sitting in the meeting, I'm like, I need to go down there and look at that car. So I get down and look at the car. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's a goodie. I mean, it's into the wheel well. And it's just not white paint on black car. Fair.
Mm.
My car's white. That one's black. It's just not that.
Mhm.
And then, I'm considering, well, I mean, people have done it to me all the time, and like all that, how you rationalize that. I'm like, well, forget it. Like, hey, do I have a business card? We live in a world where business cards, like, we don't carry it. But I found one in my car, and I wrote a note. I'm like, hey, the wind opened my door, threw my door open, and I damaged your car, and I'm sorry. Just call me. And I stuck it in the windshield. That was it. And I get a call that afternoon, and it was a random number, and I pick it up. And here's the cool thing. The guy left the voice. I picked up the phone. I said hello, and he said, "You're going to heaven for sure."
Aw.
And I was like, who is this? Anyway, I know him. I saw him yesterday. And he's like, I
Wow.
came out, I thought I got a ticket on my windshield. And then
So
I
you
look at
stressed
this,
him out at first.
yeah, I look at this note and I'm like, there's no way. Like, and then I saw your card and your name and I was like, wow, what a, now I'm not saying that to tout my character or any of that, but you know, 10, 15 years ago, I didn't have the energy, compassion, or understanding to want to do that. And I mean, obviously I wanted to repair what I did, but here's the most important part is I love my peace and serenity. It's what keeps me alive and leaning into life. If I don't repair that, I get sick. I don't get I get worse. I don't get better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Scott, you just beautifully described level 3, 4, and 5 in those stories.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
really, you
Yeah.
know, the rationalization that you started with, and you also just beautifully described choice
Mhm.
because you could have stayed in that rationalization. You could have stayed in that level of, I mean, people have done that to me. Nobody's put a note on my, window before, etc. Then you described how you're like, no, like I need to make sure I take care of this, and so you're in that level 4. And then and we'll talk about level 5, but that level 5 is, no, this isn't just for the other person. This is to even just to bring peace to myself too. So thank you for sharing that because I think hopefully for the audience, they were able to see, that shift.
Yeah. I want to go a little deeper because that's just what I do.
Yeah.
So in that space of compassion that was a trigger for you, right? What were the questions that you were asking yourself? That is the game changer.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think for me is like I even backed out. Like I was ready to go. Like I was ready to leave because people have done it to me a bunch of times.
Mhm.
But I, I live by this learning circle every day. Like what I observe, what happened, I reflect on what the day had occurred, and then I can discuss it. Most people discuss it with is themselves on a pillow at night, which is like I've always said, your brain's like a bad neighborhood, and you shouldn't be there alone. You just should not be there alone. And if I don't repair the damage that I made during the day, then the next day is going to get worse. And I'm just going to make a bad mistake sandwich, just stacking bad decisions on top of bad decisions. And so the decision is a bunch of things. Can you afford to fix the car? Check. Absolutely, I can. No problem. Number two is, what if somebody did that to you and didn't say anything? How disappointed
Mhm.
would you be? Number three is every time you look at a black 7 Series BMW, what are you going to think?
Oh,
Big one.
Right? Every time.
Conscious.
Yeah. And then whatever, and then the last part of that is, like where is that person right now? And then why are they in that building? Could be a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And it was, uh, it was just it was just a good example of good internal emotional intelligence work on the inside that gets transferred on the outside. And I don't say that to applaud what I did. Um,
it's an example.
Yeah.
yeah, it's just an
Yeah.
example.
But
Yep.
it's a perfect example, like you said, Wendy. And I'm so glad that you shared the questions that you asked, because that's the work, right? That's the compassion and curiosity piece. And so now let's talk about what did you create as a result of being conscious, right? Of consciously taking a choice to be compassionate and to be curious. What did you get to create from there? Like, how do we put that into words?
Gosh, I mean, one is what did I create? Well, a couple cool things is I was in a meeting with HR when he called. So I said, hey, I might need to pick this up. So she got to hear this story.
Mm.
She got to hear someone say, you're going to heaven, right? Which was kind of cool.
Mhm.
So it was like teachable. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And then I thought it was really strange because the guy that actually, like, I know him really well. I saw him the day before, and it, I think what's really interesting too about that, and I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but stories create stories. He will tell that story more than I will tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
So if he tells the story and somebody else does something like that, there's a good case that that story gets sticky and the next person does the same thing. And it goes and it goes and it goes. Does that make sense?
Trickle effect.
You
It's a
you created the ripple. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Love
Which
it.
is that's exactly how it works. That's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Karen, and thanks for asking. Yeah, the deeper questions, because that's how, we help people understand that, just the process of what it creates for us by asking ourselves those questions. And we don't, it's not like Scott, was thinking about all of this when he asked himself those questions, which is again, the importance of doing this kind of work, because it makes you step back and reflect and say, now, what was going through my head, right, at the time that this happened, whether it's in the lower levels of energy or in higher levels, and what emotion did that create for me? And
Here's the cool
therefore,
part
the action.
is nobody was there.
So you could have gotten
Nobody
away
was in the
scot
car.
free. Look at that, scot free.
Yeah.
They labeled that after you.
Free.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in all fairness, I looked around like, is anybody in that car?
Uh-huh.
So I'm not going to say like I'm like this Captain Virtue, right? So I mean, I was doing the math.
No, but you got to do, you got to
Yeah.
make a choice. You
Right.
chose,
Absolutely.
Right.
So that's a great story. I'm so glad that you shared that. Thank you for your vulnerability and transparency.
For sure. Yeah. It's almost like I want to go, what would this conversation look like on the opposite of all that? Like if you're feeling guilty because here's the situation where you didn't leave that card, like what's going on now? Where is that continuation of mind talk and guilt, and what do I do now? Right. So
Well, Taylor was in the car with my wife one time, and a college student ran in the back of her car. I think Taylor was in the car with her. And anyway, I called the college student and I'm like, hey, I know you're in school. And do you know what your deductible is? It was $500, right? And I was like, hey, look, I really don't want to pay for my wife's car getting fixed, but I really don't want to harm you because you're in school. So I'm going to pay your deductible. And I'll take care of that. I just need to get my wife's car fixed. And he's like, wow. And I'm like, hey, I was in college once. I didn't have any money. I doubt you have $500. He goes, I don't. And I'm like, then don't worry about it. Let's just get it fixed and then I'll take care of it. So don't worry about it. He called me back and he said, I talked to my dad and my dad said there wasn't a police report. So you can't come after me. And I was like, I go, all right. So here's what's going to happen, young man. Your dad gave you really bad advice for life because I can afford to fix the car. And I'm going to be like over this. But if your character's been torqued with bad advice and I get to leave here and never think about it again. And my gut tells me you might think about this a lot longer than I am. And that was the end of the conversation. That was it. Done.
So that was your karma yesterday where it all came back. Where you're like,
yeah.
That's good.
Wow. Wow. Good stories.
Yeah.
What else comes up for us about this level, Karen?
Yeah. Level 4. So I again, I can't stress enough. I ad nauseum. I know the idea of compassion and curiosity begets creativity, right? And so it's almost like the creativity piece is the level 5, right? The more compassionate and curious we can be on this level 4 bridge, that leads us to the win-win that we get to create in level 5. So how about let's touch on level 5? What do you think?
Yep, let's do it.
So level 5 is, again, we've said the win-win. So there's a lot of opportunity here. We start to feel more expansive in our view. We start taking more responsibility.
Yeah, and I think we call this out as the explorer, right? Like that's the way that we can reference back to this. And when we're in this level,
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
The ability to actually start to uncover and peel back and see where we're not, like we talked about the line in the sand, right? When you're in the line on the lower edge of that sand, or even the iceberg, right? You've seen some of the depictions of the iceberg, and what's going below the surface of the water is huge, whereas there's just this little iceberg above the water. Well, let's talk about getting above that water, getting on the other side of the line in that sand. This is where there's opportunity. This is my favorite word here is potential. Being able to see potential. You can't, potentiality and scarcity cannot coexist in the same space. Where there is a scarce mindset, there is never potential. Where there is potentiality, there is no scarcity. So which line do you want to be in, right? Which side of that line is what would serve you better? And when you're on the other side of the line, what is it going to take for you to get to that? Again, it's that level 4 bridge. So all these different metaphors and visuals of bridges and lines and icebergs. Scott, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, when I hear that too, for me, it's like, what were the things that were given to you as a little kid, that taught you to be a skeptic. And then, when you think of like a great teacher, right? That gave you encouragement, didn't tell you how to do it, but just gave you encouragement that just changed your mindset, right?
Yeah.
Or I think the other thing too is that I love is it's probably the shift in this is in the power and the humility and the compassion and the questions that you're asking people. It's not, you're not telling them, you're asking them really compelling questions, and you're giving them the possibility of their own potential. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. And again, we do this with ourselves. The more we can introspect with the compassion that we need to show up with ourselves and ask ourselves these same questions, just like what you did yesterday. That's where we get to create what that stepping into potentiality looks like, right? And again, when we have a situation where we have to do it with someone else, right? Maybe it's a situation that's a little frustrating right now with someone else. We could stay stuck in frustration, or we can go right into it. We can step on that bridge and just ask, if I were to demonstrate some compassion to this person, and I feel like I have questions that I want to ask, what does that look like? What does that lead to? How do we co-create a resolution together?
Yeah. Go ahead, Scott.
No, I was going to ask you, Wendy, too, because I mean, I'm sure you've been in that situation where you just asked a compelling question, and that question like led you to a spot that you could never imagine where that person was. Like you just couldn't even imagine, right? Because they were. I mean, we live in a vain society, so we're like we're going on television every day, except for me. But does that make sense? So we have our mask on, we have our vanity on, we have all that stuff. But I'm sure it's because I've watched you ask people questions, and they're always, I don't know, they're super humble. Like you ask people a question, it doesn't sound like you really care about the answer.
Well, that's really why Karen and I love what we get to do, because that coming to and with someone else as their coach is about letting go of judgment. And so when we ask questions, and I tell people this as soon as I start coaching with them, I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions. Just know I'm never looking for a right or wrong answer, because we have been, what's the word? Again, our operating system, right? Because we live, yes, conditioned that to when somebody asks us a question, we're like, oh my gosh, I hope I'm answering the right thing. Like, is this what they really want me to say? Is this the right answer? Is this the wrong answer? And my point is no. I'm like, I really literally want to know, because I can't support you in the best way possible as your coach if you aren't really honest with me, right? And transparent and vulnerable. So yeah, and it's that whole, and Scott, you and I talk about this. It's like my job is, I want to listen to understand and not to respond. Right. And so being present with that person, because as they're, going through and, even really having this understanding of this deeper dive of all of these levels and how they show up, many people have not had these kind of questions before. And so it's going to take them to a place, perhaps a lot of emotion and the realization of where they are. um and I just, going back to talking about this level 5 too, which is, the opportunity. That's the beauty in this too, right? Once we get to this level, like, people see the opportunity no matter what place they've been in. They can see that there's opportunity in any challenge that's in front of them. And again, not that we stay there on a regular basis, because we're human and we're not robots, but we do have the opportunity to come from this place more often, right? And so, and it does exactly what you said, Scott. It provides us that peace when we show up in this way. And just the word in itself, right, speaks a story. Um, I do want to touch upon a challenge, when we're in this level, because when we move into level 5, and again, we kind of refer to it as the explorer. We're thinking of all kinds of, ideas and so forth. And I can really relate to this. I've got a lot of level 5, and so it's like all these ideas, oh my gosh, I could do this, I could do this. Unfortunately, sometimes then we can get into that analysis of paralysis, where that's where, again, it's like Karen and I work on this too together. It's like, all right, now that's great, great ideas. Now, how can we shift into even the higher level of what are we going to do about it? What are we going to put into action? What risk are we going to take? And we'll talk about that later. And then also, when we're in this level, we can be disengaged from our emotions. And I really feel, and Karen, I'm interested in your perspective in this, but I really feel like a lot of times it's the perception from other people when they see and how we react. They may feel like we're disengaged from emotions too, which may not necessarily be the case. It's just that we see opportunity in everything.
Mm.
And so, people are like, I mean, does she never? And I've actually, Scott, you and Karen know me well enough to know that, I'm a pretty optimistic person. And so for some people, they see that and they make assumptions. Well, she must not have anything. She's happy all the time. She must not have anything bad happen in her life, and that's not the case. It's just the way that I choose to look at it. And it doesn't mean I'm not having a bad day or never sad, but it's just the way that I choose to look at it and take action. Karen, anything else you would add to that?
Yeah. I think there's a space here that would warrant the idea of how we are in our heads in a level 5 energy. Much like level 3, where we're kind of coping and rationalizing, level 5, we're in our head a lot. And so the difference here, and maybe this comes back to what you were saying, is how others may perceive you. There is a part here that we're missing. What is our heart, right? What's our heart saying to us? We're leading with our head in a lot of level 5. We're in a it's a very heady space. It's a so it's a space where we're seeing opportunities, we're seeing experiences, we're able to, but again, visualize this as we're labeling it as opportunity. We're not necessarily dropping back down into heart, asking, how does this feel? And so this is kind of where we'll start to touch into what level 6 looks like, where we're actually more holistic in in our perception of an experience where we are more heart and head at the same time, and intuition and everything. But right now in the space of level 5, we are very much, um, it's a jacked up rationalization, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you reminded me and brought that up even for me. I forgot that description, that each one of these were either coming from more of a head perspective or heart perspective. So that even helped me. Thanks for that reminder.
Mhm.
And that's so true. Like I definitely I start in my heart, and I though so quickly get caught up in my head then, right? And that's why it's the importance of being able to shift back.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, good. Scott, what comes up for you when you hear about all of this?
Golly. No, I think it just comes back to uh, and my only reference points is really watching people in that are really broken. Is how bad do you want it? I mean, if you're trying to repair yourself because you want to get your wife off your back, or because you want to get, the bank off your back, or like just whatever, but when it means something to you, and peace and serenity is more important, or equally as important as the air that you breathe,
Mhm.
um,
Hey,
then
Scott, can I
yeah.
just, I think a really good connection here for you to make, and me to ask this question for you, is your work with recovery. And so when you see people shift to this level 5 of peace and acceptance, what do you see happen for them and perhaps for those around them?
Yeah, so there's a beautiful message inside of that, because you can't do it for them. So there's a quote that people say, it works if you work it. And I always say it works because you're worth it. So because I needed to know that.
Yeah. The
But
teacher comes, the student shows up when the teacher, wait, the student shows up when no, the
The-
teacher shows up when the student is ready,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then the cool part for a lot of that is the fact that, when it's all said and done, they will have said, I did it myself. But here's the
Mhm,
thing. I heard this a long time ago. Two sickies don't make a welly. So in
yeah.
your life, you need a welly and a sickie, right?
Mhm.
But the beautiful thing about recovery is, what we've learned is, I can't fix that person. The only person that can fix them is themselves. So the best thing I can do in a lot of cases is get out of their way
And when
and
you
let
do that, and
I
they
just,
come to this place of peace and acceptance,
mhm.
I can't
Or
imagine
the
the
opposite.
right.
Oh, it's
When
beautiful.
we're yeah, I mean, I can't imagine the stories that you've seen
Oh,
when somebody does come to that place of acceptance. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, stories of, what their wives have said, or their children have said, or, what they're doing in their lives. And it is just, it might be the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen very often. That's the
Mhm.
problem.
Well, thank you for the work that you do with recovery, Scott, because I do know it is very important to you, and it's just a part of who you are, and you've made such a difference in so many people. So thank you for that.
Well, that's
Um,
the blessing of it, because the secret of it too is, you don't ever graduate.
yeah.
So the
Learning.
the last class is, you got to give it away. So there's no
Yeah.
graduating.
Mhm.
That's right. It's a journey, right? Not a destination. Okay, so as we are wrapping up today, um, went deeper in level 4 and really described level 5, and talked a little bit about that. I think the growth work and the call to action for today, again, I think is just, what about that, right? What came up for you as we were describing those different levels? How do you show up in those levels of energy? And, um, what's important about that self awareness and knowledge, and what impact might that have? Anything else you would add, Scott? And Karen?
I think for me would be if I was going to ask somebody to explore this in an interaction with somebody, could I ask myself, am I open and curious,
Mhm.
or am I closed and defensive? Now, that's a really easy question to answer. Yes or no. Here's the important part. Why? Is it me? Is it them? Is it the circumstances I'm in? When we can begin to identify why that's happening to us, then we can carry that into the next situation. Does that make sense?
Mm.
And then just try.
Mhm.
I mean, I would say with probably very, it, you know what you want. You carry your old self into the conversation. You probably know the outcome. You could probably record it. So why not try something new? Why not just try being open or curious?
Yeah.
Or quite frankly, if you're have the disease to please, you could be a little closed. See how that works for you.
You get to choose, right?
Yeah.
And Karen, we'll talk about this later, but it really truly is about taking aligned action.
Yeah.
Right. So with that,
Let's go inside.
yes. And again, what is it? What is it that comes up for you as you think about these levels? And we'll see you next time.